So at this time now, we're going to move on to our second speaker. So our second speaker will be talking to us about pre-K to grade 12 and public versus private school. So just to give a little introduction, our next speaker is Dr. Esther Omogbehin, and she is the assistant superintendent of an elementary school. So she's a veteran administrator with a remarkable success record in improving schools, elementary, middle, and high schools. She holds a bachelor's and a master's in English language arts, a master's in multicultural education, and recently a doctorate in educational leadership from San Diego State University. As a classroom teacher and principal, she holds high expectations for all her students and works tirelessly to provide the supports and scaffolds that students need to succeed. She has traveled extensively, assisting with schools in Ghana and Nigeria, and has held several leadership roles as a presenter and implementer. Dr. Omogbehin joined San Diego Unified in 1994 as a classroom teacher and has held a few positions, including cluster substitute, classroom teacher, staff developer, literacy administrator, beginning teacher support provider, vice principal, principal, and even lead principal. She joined the Houston Independent School District in 2014 as a school support officer, overseeing 6 challenging high schools. And then a year later, she was promoted as chief school officer, overseeing a range of K through 12 schools, including Montessori and dual language, non-zone magnet schools. And then in 2017, she was hired as chief academic officer, Roosevelt School District, overseeing 19 K-8 schools and the instructional program of the school. 2 years later, she was hired by Portland Public School as assistant superintendent of elementary schools, a portfolio comprised of 58 schools in total. She continues to be a mentor for aspiring leaders and teachers in the Houston Independent School District, even as she supports the schools in Portland. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to her, and she will be speaking to us on public versus private schools.
Good morning, everyone. I do want to start off by apologizing. I am Dr. Esther Omogbehin. I am on the West Coast, and once in a while, I forget that there's a 2-hour difference between our time and your time. So I've been up since like 3 because I get up early to do my devotions. And I just thought, oh, just glance at your watch and see what's going on. And I saw Pastor's message. I'm like, oh, I still had 1 more hour. But I do apologize. That's what happened. But I am here now and ready to go. I also do appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about the educational system in America, because it is something. It is quite interesting, and it can be very daunting. So my presentation today, as you know, is based on your need. What is it? Roadmap to success roadmap. Thank you. Success roadmap from diapers to caps and gowns. So one thing I do want you to know, next slide, please. One thing I do want you to know is that there are 3 basic kinds of school systems in America. You can distill all the schools in America into those 3. They are either public schools, which is the most common, private schools or parochial schools, and then you have your charter schools, which is sort of a blend of both of them. In your public schools, you don't pay a penny. They're usually pre-K-12, and sometimes you actually have preschool as well tagged onto it all the way to 12th grade. In your private schools, you could pay a lot. You could pay nominal sums of money, or you could earn scholarships. And then in your charter schools, you also don't necessarily pay because the government pays for you, but they have different ways that they also can put rules in to get money or raise money to support their programs. Next slide, please. I'll definitely take questions at the end, or you could ask me questions as I go, just in case you're afraid you might forget. So the American education system starts with ages 3 through 5, all the way to 18. Sometimes you have preschool school, which would go as low as 18 months. But those are not very common, and those oftentimes you pay out of your own pocket. If it is a church preschool, you might end up getting some kind of scholarship to support your need. The structure is pre-K 5, which is ages 3 through 5 or 4 through 5. And then you have some schools that run just K-5, others that run pre-K-8, which means the kids stay there until after middle school. Or you have some that are just K-8, they don't have the pre-K portion of it. Or you have the K-6 or the pre-K-6, or you have the pre-K-12. This is rare, but it's common mostly in your private or your parochial schools. So when I say pre-K, ages 3 to 5, the American education system only takes 5-year-olds in kinder. Sometimes they will go as low and take what they call your young 5-year-olds. So they might turn 5 like in October or something. So they will allow them to start school in August, but they're considered very young. And what they try to do is say that they want the kids to be in environments that are developmentally appropriate for them. For us in Africa, we don't think that way. When our kids are ready, they're ready. And every kid is ready at a different time. But American system is very much based on chronology. That is an age system. How old are you? This is the grade that you're supposed to be, whether you're ready or not. A lot of that also impacts our immigrants because we have immigrants who come into the country who don't speak English at all. But because they're maybe 13 or 14 or 12, they're placed in middle school. It is age appropriate, it's developmentally appropriate, but they don't have the academic stamina or background to do the work. So then they end up in all kinds of various programs or systems to try to support them. Some of them are great about catching up, others of them struggle, and then others of them are designated as special ed needs because they don't blossom as quickly. Next slide, please. So the American education system is pre-K-5, like I said, and then you have your middle school, which is 6 to 8. If it is a pre-K-8, then your 6th to 8th grade students are in that pre-K-8 structure. The challenge with the 6 to 8 in a pre-K-8 structure is that your 6th to 8th grade students, those are your middle school students, usually don't have a lot of options in terms of the supports that they get because that's oftentimes a very small group. If you haven't noticed, the American education system is based on, especially at the public school, is based on your ADA. That is the amount of money the government agrees to pay per student per day to be in school. So if you don't have a whole lot of money for your middle schoolers, then of course, sometimes you don't end up with as many teachers or as many options in programs or electives, or you have some of your elementary teachers who maybe have a minor in math, teaching math. So they're not necessarily experts. They, by default, they just end up teaching those courses. Some parents love it because they feel that it protects the innocence of their children for much longer. Other parents don't necessarily agree to that, so they send their kids to middle school, 6 through 8. The challenge I've found with those kids who go pre-K-8 versus those who go pre-K-5, 6, 8, is that the transition to high school is most challenging for those students who go pre-K-8. And the reason is because they are almost always in a childlike environment. They have to consider the little ones, their rules are almost the same. Teaching them to be independent and learn to problem solve is not necessarily as ingrained as when they are in middle school and actually look into high school. So sometimes their transitions are a lot harder. So I always tell parents that if they can put their kids in a middle school, that would be the best way to go, in my opinion. Again, that's my opinion based on my observations. Then you have your 9 through 12. So occasionally in the US system, you have 7 through 9. So you would have K through 6 instead of K through 5. And then you will have 7 through 9. That is considered a junior high. There aren't as many around anymore. They've turned them into middle schools, but you can still find them around here and there. And then you either have high school be a 10, 11, and 12, or a 9, 10, 11, and 12, depending on what system your kids are in. Next slide, please. Next slide, thanks. So the standard practice is that the American education system relies on age for academic placement. It doesn't matter what you know, what you don't know. If you've ever had schooling or no schooling, if your schooling has been interrupted or not, they go by your chronological age and they place you. Then they try to find other ways to support you, which sometimes it works, but many times it doesn't, because language acquisition, as you know, takes a process and time. You don't just pick up the language. And oftentimes, to academic language is a little bit more difficult than street language, the ones they pick up with their friends. The academic language has to be specifically taught. So you have to have great teachers who are willing to teach it. That's where you have your ESL program or your ELD program. Your ESL program is for those kids who are just learning the language. Your ELD is for those kids who have enough but need the academic language to support their learning. The system also does not advocate or support retention. So I've heard a lot of parents say, my child went pre-K 12 and they can't read, they can't write, they can't do this, that, and the other. The system does not support retention for the most part. They just keep moving the child on, which I don't necessarily think it's a great thing. But research also does say that retaining a child could actually impede or interfere with their self-esteem. So while I understand the need not to retain, I do believe it is the responsibility of all educators to seriously get behind our children and make sure they are equipped to be successful. Tutoring is offered as an option in most of these schools to support the learning. Students can go to that tutoring program after school. The challenge in some areas is that if you're a bus rider, most of our kids ride the bus to school. The bus runs on a particular routine, right, or time frame. So if your child has to stay behind for tutoring, you do have to consider how you're going to pick them up or how they're going to get home. The other thing that they also provide is there are opportunities for the child to actually do some work remotely. So if you're able to set up a computer and the teacher is willing, maybe you can help them, or you can get your own tutors on your own who come to your house and support your child. When it's a public school, tutoring is offered in most schools during the year. So it runs concurrently with the school program. Then they have the summer school, which is an extension of the school program. And it is also an extension of what students need to learn or what they need to catch up on. The problem with summer school is that not everybody gets to go. It is on a tiered scale depending on how much money you're funded for or how many students you're funded for. So for example, this year in our district, we weren't funded for a whole lot of students. So what they decided to do was pick only those kids who we call the cusp kids. Those are the kids who are closest to being able to be successful, where you don't have to do a whole lot of work so that we can get a lot more of them successful. And we debated it back and forth. Do we help the ones who are falling behind? Because when you think about it, what then happens is the ones who are falling behind who did not get to go to summer school to sort of bridge that gap, those ones fall even further behind in the new school year. But it was a conversation and that's where they settled. Next slide, please. So the general design is that every school does have a mainstream education. That is, every child is expected to be in the classroom. Every child is expected to receive the same curriculum, and every child is entitled to be mainstreamed. Now, that's where you're supposed to start. Now, when you start in there and the teacher discovers that either the child is struggling or is not able to retain information or is distracted, whatever it is, the teacher may then begin to keep records and recommend the child for special education analysis, which means now you have the psychologist come in, You have the teachers, all the teachers are now working together and gathering data on their observations. And then the kid goes through a battery of tests. Of course, they meet with a parent. The teacher is expected to continue to meet with the parent to say, here is where the class is, here are the expectations, here is Solomon's work compared to Ruth's work, and this is what we suspect, this is a pattern. All the teachers meet with the parents on an ongoing basis. And at the end of the day, they may recommend special education services. The parent may agree or the parent may disagree. If the parent disagrees, the school cannot move forward. If the parent agrees, then they try to put the appropriate special education services in place. The challenge with special education is that sometimes, quite honestly, our educators are not as prepared to teach certain children or are very reluctant to teach certain children. So what happens is special education becomes a parking lot. Any child you don't necessarily want to teach, can't reach, instead of thinking about different ways to teach the child, you send them off to special education. So what I mean by that is Howard Gardner did a research about a couple of years ago on the 7 different learning styles. There have been so many ever since, but I don't think there are more than 10. And some kids are visual learners. Some kids are tactile learners. Visual learners, if you show it to them in pictures, they grasp it. Then you can come back and do, the talking and whatever else you want to do to support their learning experience. The problem with visual instruction is that it requires a teacher to actually really think about how they're going to use the visuals. When are they going to introduce it? What are they going to do with it? And what's the outcome going to be? So it is much easier for them to walk into a classroom and just talk. Just talk. And that's a lot of what we see. Well, for kids of color in general, talking does not necessarily work for them. Then you have your tactile learners. Those are the kids who like to touch things. You give them a puzzle, they create something. You take them into a vocational space, they can figure out what to do with those wires. Again, the teacher is required to be able to talk. So when I was a middle school teacher, we realized, I'm just going to give this example really quickly, we realized that our 8th grade students struggled with algebra. Algebra is very abstract. And for a lot of students, that abstract thinking does not develop until later in life. So what I did was I got with Project Lead the Way, Gateway to Technology, and we brought that program into the school as an elective. What that program allows the kids to do is manipulate all kinds of 3D diagrams and experience this visual that they normally would not see, so that when the teacher now begins to add the formula in the classroom, it makes sense. So the math teacher and the technology teacher, the Gateway to Technology teacher, worked together closely to design their lesson plans. But you have to have a school leader who understands how that works, because again, Gateway to Technology is a lot of little pieces like Legos and batteries and stuff that can create a very interesting space for play, right? So you've got to be diligent about how you support the kids. Then you have your gifted and talented education. Now, this is another very interesting area because gifted and talented kids manifest in different ways. Some of them are highly emotional kids. Some of them are incredibly sensitive kids, but they're also incredibly smart. So if you miss it, you think that they're emotionally disturbed as opposed to thinking that they're just smart and that's just the way they're wired, right? So when we have to get into the gifted program, you do have to take a test. It's almost all about abstract thinking, abstract reasoning, rational thinking, and all of those other things. So once the kids are in that program, supposedly they are accelerated. In other words, their content is more rapid and they're introduced to a lot more challenging stuff. And sometimes they're given opportunities to work a lot more independently than you would in a regular class. In some districts, this class is isolated. It's like the gifted class. In others, it's a mix. Maybe 50% of them will be gifted. The other 50 will be high-performing kids. And in others, it's a small group that's just, a special group of kids that receive instruction from the teacher. So many districts have this program. Then you have the special education program, which is the other end of the spectrum. These are your students who, they're not necessarily dumb kids. They actually aren't. They just take a little bit more time to learn. So they need more time. They need a lot more explanation. Where you can jump from 0 to 50 for your gifted kid, you may only be able to jump from 0 to 5 for your special education student, because they have to understand the process and what they need to do to learn. But oftentimes, once they get it, they're good. The challenge with the special education program is that if you don't have a teacher who knows or is able to distill what's important, you may get to the end of the year and discover that the child has only covered 1/3 of the curriculum, which means they're behind. So if that compounds, every year they're behind, of course, they're going to get to high school and they'll be struggling. Next slide, please. So in a charter school, they oftentimes have a mainstream program. They are required to also provide special education services, but they're not required to provide gifted services. Special education services are bound by the federal government. Those the federal government funds you for, and there is an expectation around it. It is not the same thing with your gifted program. So in a charter school, the drive or the focus is to make sure that kids are mainstreamed, which means everybody gets the general education, and then they get whatever else the charter school offers. So if you're in a parochial charter school, a Christian charter school, it may have a flavor of whatever it is that charter school believes in, or does. So we have a charter school in San Diego that is attached to the Rock Church. A lot of Christian families send their kids there because underlying all of those is, of course, you're teaching around Christianity, the disciplines, and everything else that you need to do. In public school, there's a strict separation of church and state. So you will not and you should not have anybody teaching your child anything about the Bible and so on and so forth. So the public school is just open. Next slide, please. And then in your high schools, all high schools are 4-year programs, right? Sometimes a child is accelerated, but that is really rare. And the reason is because you have a required number of credits. You have your traditional high schools, right? And your traditional high schools are the ones that are most common. Then you have your specialty high schools. Houston has a bunch of them. For example, they have HSPVA, which is a high school for visual and performing arts. They also have the Carnegie Vanguard, which is your high school for extremely smart kids. To get into that school, you have to pass your test at the 99.9 percentile or above. Then they also have the early colleges, which is also a high school. Then they have Energy High School. I mean, the list goes on. And every district does have a form of this. In some districts, they stand alone. That is all we do. That's our focus. That's our theme. Everything we do with math, language, science, and social studies filters through all our themes, right? At other places, there's a blend. But every district does have electives that their kids can engage in. So those electives are, of course, a smattering of here and there, of things here and there. So you might have a traditional high school that has a dance program, or a traditional high school that also has an art program. So these are independent classes, or traditional high school that has like a technology program or some kind of vocation. You also have Barbara Jordan in Houston. Barbara Jordan High School focuses on, I know all these high schools because those are the ones I supervised when I was over there, focuses on vocations. So if you want to be a hairdresser, if you want to be a barber, if you want to be a some kind of technology, a welder, stuff like that. So that's their focus. And then those are your specialty high schools. And then you have your, like I said, your traditional high schools. You occasionally have high schools that offer a 5th year. The 5th year oftentimes is for students who are ESL students, who, remember how I said earlier that they need more time to accomplish the same things that other kids would accomplish. So what they do is they take that 4-year program and they spread it over 5. Or it is also for your special education students where they take that 4-year program and spread it over 5. Next slide, please. So your total graduation credits at high school should be 44 semester credits. And it breaks down this way. In some cases, it is less. Some people would take they will tell you that you need 4 years of math, right? Or they would, like the UCs, for example, will tell you you need 4 years of math and 4 years of language arts, and then you need all these breakdowns. But your total graduation credits would be 44, regardless of how you break them down. You have to have basically certain number of credits for math, language arts, social studies, and science, and PE. Those are the must-haves. Everything else, you can sort of balance it here and there. You have kids who are smart and want the experience in the high schools, So we try, like when I was a middle school principal in San Diego, we had some kids who took pre-algebra in 7th grade. Then they took algebra in 8th grade, which means they could take geometry in 9th grade. So they were 1 year ahead of their math program already. It allows them to take a lot of other electives that in some cases give them an advantage when they apply for colleges. Next slide, please. So you have all kinds of colleges. You have your community colleges. If you plan on going to a 4-year college, sometimes people go to 2 years of community college. It's just that much cheaper. And then they go to 2 years of, a 4-year college. So they enter as juniors in a 4-year college. You have your vocational schools where you learn a trade, a skill. You have your state colleges, which, every state has theirs. Houston has theirs, and San Diego has their San Diego State, Portland Public State. Anyway, you have state colleges all over the place. They mostly cater to the kids in that state, but they do have a quota that allows them to also take kids from other states who want to come there. Then you have your UC systems. This is specific to California. There are 10 of them, and they're weighted differently. They're also weighted the same, weighted differently in the sense that their graduation requirements may be a little bit different. For example, UC San Diego and UC Berkeley are known for their academics. That's their driver. So their graduation requirements are just a tad bit different from UCLA and UC Riverside. Then you have UC Irvine, and you have UC Merced, UC Davis, and so on and so forth. But there are 10 of them. They rival a lot of the Ivy League colleges. They're good. They're just as good or better, but they're a little bit cheaper. And they take kids from all over the world. So there are no limits to how many kids they have, and they're also ranked. Then you have your Ivy Leagues, your Harvards, your Princetons, and then your Yales, and then you have your private colleges. The Ivy Leagues, of course, have a name. They have a tradition. They've been established for a long time. They have a network of alumni just by virtue of the fact that they've been around for a long time. And then you have your private colleges. Your private colleges, oftentimes people think the most expensive, which in some cases is true, but you'll be amazed that sometimes they also offer the best scholarships. So when kids go on college tours, I always encourage them not to leave out private colleges if they're interested. At least take a chance, give them a look, see what they have to offer. The Ivy League colleges also do offer scholarships, and so do the youth. In fact, all of them offer scholarships at one point or the other. Community colleges also offer vocations, which you can take the vocations without going to a 4-year college. So you can get a certification in, say, childcare, or opening a daycare, or a preschool, or culinary services, or something like that at a community college without necessarily going to a 4-year college. Next slide, please. So that is the very end, and I will take questions. It's a lot more, but boy, it's very complicated as well. So questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, so I have one child that's very, very gifted, and I was going to enroll her into everybody can hear me?
I can barely hear you. I
Okay.
heard I have a one child. What did you say after that?
Okay, I have one child who's very, very gifted. She was gonna go to this elementary school that's where our housing is. But
Okay.
then she we just got a call because I had her on the wait list for a charter. I don't know if you've heard of the school. It's called Beta Academy. I know you come from Houston.
Yes.
Yeah. So I've heard a lot of good things about the academy. I had two friends. One son graduated from there, and he's in Harvard. The other one, she went to school there, but they moved to Austin now. So we just got an email like 2 days ago saying that, she's been on the wait list. It's through lottery, and they finally accept her 2 days ago. So I was kind of scared because I don't want nobody to teach my kid, certain things. It's still a public school. I didn't see anything wrong with the school, but then, with the school in the elementary where we are, I know they won't pull a stunt like this. I guess maybe because I'm gonna be new to this program. I just have my only fear with school is I don't want nobody to teach them LGBT, and I don't want nobody to give them their version of history, especially like think when my oldest, one of the schools she went to, they did not teach Black history.
Okay.
So I had to voice that she will learn about Martin Luther King, and when they did, they just had a few things on the wall just to, you know, make me so I won't say nothing.
Yes.
So I just don't know about the school. That's why I was like, do you know about the Beta Academy? They say it's good.
So I have heard about it, but I haven't visited it. And for me, I always feel that good is relative. What is good for you may not necessarily be okay for me. So I always say to parents, even when they tell you it's a really good school, you should go to visit the school. If you're interested, go to visit the school, ask them about their curriculum, see if you can visit their classroom during instruction, just to see how things run. Pop in at different times of the day, start of the school, end of the school, middle of the school day, and try to get to know which classroom she's going to be in. Talk to the teacher, find out their beliefs or philosophies, because what you'll find out with some of these teachers is sometimes even when they're not required to or asked to teach LGBTQ and all of that other stuff, some of them figure out a way to slip it or slide it in.
Yeah.
Right? So you want to know what the beliefs of the teacher is. Educating kids in America is quite a feat. It parallels the Olympics, in my opinion, because at every stage you have to be very watchful. You have to ask the questions. And I will tell you, with my daughter, for example, I got to a point where I had to tell the teacher, give me the assignment, I'll give it to her, she'll do it, she'll give it to me, and I'll give it to you. Because you get the nonsense of, oh, we can't find her assignment, she didn't turn it in, when I know she turned it in. So you just have to be very watchful. There's no perfect school. Some are just better than others.
Okay. And then another question I have is transitioning programs if you do have a kid that is have a special need. So that's where I'm at with my other child. She doesn't really quite talk a lot and interact with people much, but she's kind of to herself. She really into computers. So I was like, should I put her in one of those specialty high schools where they'll just take that passion of hers and run with it so she can find a job? Or
How old is she?
She's 14. She's going into high school, Manville High.
Okay. So what I would suggest is that you go to the high school that she is going to be going to anyway, if it's a public or a private, and find out about their program. Because yes, it is true. If that is her strength and passion, we want her to flourish there. But the other part of it too is that employers are looking for people who can work in teams and work collaboratively. So I understand she likes to work independently, like our computer geeks and so on. That's fine. But she's got to also be able to, if the need arises, to be able to work on a team just in case that is part of what her job requires her to do. And you don't want to force it. You just want to provide the opportunity and hope that little by little, she comes out of her shell and sort of begins to embrace those behaviors.
Okay. Do you have any, do you know any names of like specialty schools though for like tech in Houston?
No, not really, because they don't do technology in isolation. As you know, technology is just a support tool. It's a vehicle or a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. So it helps us to do things, but we have to have what we want to do to be able to use technology. So a lot of the schools offer technology 24/7 around everything they do, but I don't think there's a school that just independently, focuses on just technology because they need a driver.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Do we have any more questions for Dr. Esther?
Yes, ma'am, I do. Thank you so much, Miss Esther. What are some of the names of the private colleges? Because this is my first time hearing about, private colleges. I usually stop at the Ivy League.
Oh, wow. There are so many private colleges. So you have, let me try and pull up some of the names here, and I can, of course, find some more for you.
And I think we're going to be talking some more about colleges. The last speaker will be talking on colleges, so you don't have to give us.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't need to necessarily worry about it.
Yeah.
So you have private colleges like in Oregon, for example. It's a bunch of them. You have a lot of them all over the place. Chapman is one. National University is one. Reed College is one. Judge Fawkes is another. Lewis and Clark is another. The list just goes on. And every state has a bunch of them. Wesley is another one.
Okay, one more question. The Ivy League school, are they open to everybody? Because sometimes they are presented in such a way that it's like, hey, this is only for the rich and the famous. Are they open to everyone? And how can a normal family, middle income or low income, prepare their child to be able to enter a place like Harvard?
That's where your counselors come in. So when my daughter was in 6th grade, there was a group that I signed her up for, and I can't even remember the name of the group right now. They were a group of counselors, teachers, professors, and so on, who actually guided your child. They tracked them from 6th grade and guided them all through. By the time they got to 12th grade, they have distilled all their interests and picked the best colleges in the US that match their interests. So they get supports that way. A couple of years ago, also, Harvard had this program, and I'm still sure they have it, where if you make $60,000 or less, your child attended Harvard for free.
Wow.
So they do have them. Princeton has them. Yale has them. You just have to call, their admissions office and say, here's what I'm looking for, and I want to know what's available. And these are scholarships kids don't have to pay back if they are making less than that. They also have programs where even if you get the loans on a sliding scale, they reduce it as you go through. So everybody offers whatever they can to help people, but a lot of our parents of color or families of color don't know about them. And just like you said, we think they're schools for the rich and the famous, so nobody looks that way. So these monies sit in the endowment fund forever. And sometimes they're billions and billions and billions of dollars because nobody accesses them.
So the parent have to actively, go to the school and start asking questions and start, getting all
just
the
call them.
information.
Yes,
Okay.
just call them and they'll direct you to the right people to speak with. Sometimes schools or parents take their kids on college tours, so you'd go to different places and you'd have the opportunity to listen to the admissions officer. They'll give you all kinds of brochures about their financial aid and what they can give to you. And then you go from there. At other times, you just pick up the phone and you ask them the questions that you have, and you ask if somebody can guide you as to what your needs are. And if you're able to visit, you just drive down there and visit. But the counselors are very helpful. However, the problem is that with our kids of color, Sometimes you have counselors who are very, very passionate and are all behind the kids, right? And then you have counselors who could care less, So as a parent, you want to make sure that you provide your child the best opportunities available. If the counselor is not doing it, or the counselor is pretending to do it and not do it, then you also need to be doing something on the side, or at least working alongside the counselor so that you're all on the same page.
Yeah. So we need to be an active parent and not
Yes.
just like sit back and
Don't
thank
sit
you so
back.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for your questions. We'll take maybe about one more question, and then we will take a short break at 12 p.m. for 10 minutes. And when we come back, we will continue answering your questions. So we'll take one more question at this time before our break.
Hi everyone, my name is Joy. Sorry I couldn't show my video right now, and if you hear any noise, my daughter is right here. One of the questions that I have is for the pre-K kids. I just have a daughter that's going to kindergarten, and then another one that's going to pre-K. This school where we moved from, the school system is a bit better than where we are now. And my question is there a way where, or a website, centralized spot where I can check what the ratings of the schools are, and how they're ranked, to know the best school in this area for my children? Thank you.
Well, that's a really good question. I oftentimes recommend that parents start with the district office, because the district office will have their schools. Of course, the district office is not going to tell you which ones are bad, but the district office will have the performance of each of the schools, right? And you can look at what the performance has been and make decisions based on that. The other thing is you can just visit the school. You can just visit the school and just spend time, in the classrooms to take a look. Because sometimes when they rank schools, US has what they call US best high schools, US this, that, and the other. And sometimes when I look at that list, I'm surprised to see some schools on there, and I'm surprised to not see some schools on there. Because the metrics to measure and determine a good school versus a bad school varies. And half the time you don't necessarily know. Sometimes it is based on how many kids of color you have, or how much endowment money you have, or things that are just totally abstract. So I recommend that parents go to the school and just visit the school, and then talk to people who may have been students at the school or who have since left the school. Because the job of a school is to prepare you for your next level. So if people have left the school and they're in a new school and now they're struggling, it's like, what were the foundations that were laid at that of the school, which, by the way, at the time you thought was really good because your kid never complained and your kid was happy, right? So that's the way that I recommend you do it. I call it follow your child.
Thank you so much. Can I ask a follow-up question for that, please?
Absolutely. If it's okay with our moderator.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so what you mentioned, I wanted to do that, but then in the case where the school says, or the teacher says, well, because the pre-K students, they're still attached to their parents, you can't come and watch your child while they're being taught. What do we do? Because I'm also concerned, the curriculum, what they're being taught, very, very scared at this point. And I know I can't, homeschooling is not an option for me at the moment. So in that case, what do I do if I find out, okay, this school maybe is okay, I'm okay with it, but then they're like, no, you can't come in and see how the children are being taught?
Well, if your child is in the class, the teacher is probably right. So what I recommend is that you go to the school before your child even gets enrolled at the school, so that you have an idea. And then when you know the classroom that your child is going to be in, then you have a conversation with that teacher prior to your child coming into that classroom. That said, as your child grows older and is a little bit more mature, I am sure you can go in once in a while to volunteer or to observe?
Thank you so much for
Sure.
answering our questions. At this time, we'll take a short break